Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Abraham Lincoln, Part 10, Battle of Bull Run, Manassas Junction, Virginia. We stopped last time in 1861. The Civil War had started with the firing on Fort Sumter, South Carolina, by the South Carolina Confederate Army against Union forces there. And there was an early casualty in the war was in Alexandria, Virginia. Elmer Ellsworth, a family friend of Abraham Lincoln, was killed trying to take down a Confederate flag there within a site of Washington City. And "Remember Ellsworth" became a popular Union slogan throughout the war. He was the first famous person killed in the war, North or South. And a poem was written about Elmer Ellsworth. Went like this, quote, "Before he found a martyr's crown, in freedom's cause, O bright renown, he tore the flag of treason down. Remember Ellsworth, boys, remember Ellsworth. This shall be the rallying cry of all the free, who would our flag still honored see. Remember Ellsworth, boys." And then there was a northern song that went like this, quote, "So then we called the volunteers, the country for to save, and show the southern chivalry that northern men were brave. And then our gallant firemen formed a regiment of Zouaves, and under Colonel Ellsworth expressed the country's cause. But they lost their young commander, for the Union he did die, but they'll make the South pay dearly." In early June of 1861, Stephen Douglas died of acute rheumatism at age 48. So he was Lincoln's opponent, and he'd run for president. So if he had won, he would not have lived very long. He also was a heavy drinker. So that was the end of Stephen Douglas. Now in 1861, there were levees at the White House. These were gatherings where President Lincoln met the public once or twice a week. He held evening receptions. And Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, one time came to one of those and met President Lincoln. And Melville said that President Lincoln shook hands, quote, "like a man sawing wood. It's so much percord." Of course, that's what the people come for, to shake the president's hand. Biographer Stephen B. Oates wrote, quote, "The levees were painful ordeals, which left Abraham Lincoln's right hand so swollen and sore that he could not use it for hours." President Lincoln's little sons, received gifts, and the most valued were pets, and the favorites were two goats, Nanko and Nanny. And one time at a White House event, a reception in the East Room, President Lincoln's son Tad harnessed Nanko to a chair and drove through the reception, creating chaos. But I'm sure they also enjoyed this boy riding a goat. Now, General Benjamin Butler, President Lincoln promoted him to be a brigadier general, and Butler wrote a letter to President Lincoln and said, quote, "I will accept the commission. There is one thing I must say to you, as we don't know each other. As a Democrat, I opposed your election, and I did all I could for your opponent. But I shall do no political act and loyally support your administration. As long as I hold your commission, and when I find any act I cannot support, I shall bring the commission back at once and return it to you." And President Lincoln responded to that and said, quote, "That is frank, that is fair, but I want to add one thing. When you see me doing anything that for the good of the country ought not to be done, come and tell me so, and why you think so, and then perhaps you won't have any chance to resign your commission." So you see President Lincoln's outstanding human relations. Really, this was so important during the war. Now, since 1841, Congress had provided $20,000 annually to refurbish the White House. And the First Lady, Mary Lincoln, was busy buying furniture, wallpaper, rugs, and china. She traveled to New York City and Philadelphia. She made 11 buying trips as First Lady. Now, Congress returned in early July because of the war crisis, and it was hot in Washington, a lot of mosquitoes. The red sandstone, the Smithsonian Institute, which had been completed in 1855, was visible from the White House. Of course, it's still there. Very memorable building. The Washington Monument was just a stub, not finished, only 176 feet high, only a third of its final 555 feet length. Now, Mary Lincoln, the First Lady, she personally oversaw the rehabilitation of the White House, scrubbing, painting, and plastering. The first time in years, the White House was sparkling clean. Now, unfortunately, Mary overspent on the allowance of $20,000. This created problems with her husband. He was a very honest man. However, it was worked out. Congress passed two appropriations to cover the deficit. Andrew Johnson was the only Southern senator, he was from Tennessee, who refused to follow his state when it seceded, when Tennessee seceded. One thing about President Lincoln is that he was always reluctant to dismiss subordinates, however incompetent. So you can see his kind-hearted nature, but of course this is a reality of life that incompetent people really need to be pushed aside. In June of 1861, 30% of the Union Army was sick from typhoid and dysentery due to poor sanitation. Yeah, generally poor, dirty drinking water. Now, at the start of the war, the Army had only 30 surgeons and 86 assistant surgeons. Eventually, there were 11,000 Army doctors as the war went on, and all these fellows were getting killed and wounded in the war. 1861, the grounds surrounding the Washington Monument, that stub we mentioned, it was an open grazing area for cattle, sheep, and pigs. And it was said that it was called the Washington National Monument Cattle Yard. Now, a new force in Congress was the War Democrats. These were Southerners who supported the Union, including Andrew Johnson of Tennessee, the last state to secede. June 3rd, as we mentioned, Stephen Douglas died of, also they said he had cirrhosis of the liver. He was a drinker. That's a sign of alcoholism. And he supported, early in the war, he supported President Lincoln in the war effort. July 4th, Congress gathered to deal with this crisis, and President Lincoln's message was that he had pursued all peaceful measures to avoid war. And President Lincoln said on July 4th, quote, "This issue embraces more than the fate of these United States. It presents to the whole family of man the question whether a constitutional republic or a democracy, a government of the people, by the same people, can or cannot maintain its territorial integrity against its own domestic foes." So that's a great quote that, he's saying this war is about the survival of democracy for the whole world. This was an experiment. Other countries, almost all the countries of the world, had despotism, dictatorships, kings, or whatever. But this was a government accountable to the people. And now this crisis, would the country completely dissolve if the South broke away? President Lincoln continued, quote, "This is essentially a people's contest. On the one side of the Union, it is a struggle for maintaining in the world that form and substance of government, whose leading object is to elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the path of laudable pursuits for all, to afford all an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life." Now, this is wonderful language, that this is about, in America, the United States was about a place where people could succeed, a land of opportunity. And would this opportunity for people be destroyed if the South, if the Confederacy won and the country broke up into two or more pieces? Now, Frederick Douglass, the leading African-American spokesman of the era, said, quote, "In the late message of our honest president, which purports to give an honest history of our present difficulties, no mention is at all made of slavery. Anyone reading that document with no previous knowledge of the United States would never dream from anything there written that a slave-holding war was waged upon the government, determined to overthrow it. The proclamation goes forth at the head of all our armies, assuring the slave-holding rebels that slavery shall receive no detriment from our arms. Now, President Lincoln had not mentioned slavery. Of course, that was the divisive issue, and Frederick Douglass was disappointed. However, President Lincoln's his goal was to preserve the Union, and he needed these four border states, which were slave states. He needed them to stay in the Union. So it was really too early to call for an end to slavery. There was a call in Washington for the U.S. Army to march south. The Confederacy had a new capital, Richmond, Virginia. That happened on July 20th, only 100 miles south of Washington City. So this was a strange war. You had the two capitals very close to each other, and throughout the war, both vulnerable to the opposing armies. On June 26th, the New York Tribune wrote, quote, "Forward to Richmond! Forward to Richmond! The rebel Congress must not be allowed to meet there on the 20th of July. By that date, the place must be held by the National Army." So you can see, people didn't know what was coming, this terrible war. The newspaper generals were pressuring President Lincoln in April, May, and June to push south and take Richmond. Most American soldiers only were in a 90-day militia and an obligation of service, only up until the end of July. So this was problematic because, the war went on for 4 years. The U.S. Army was unprepared for war, and President Lincoln was shocked at the whole arrangement, everything, only having guys for 3 months. President Lincoln asked for Congress for $400,000 to support an army of 400,000 men. So he had a better idea of what was going to be needed. Congress boosted the amount to $500,000 for an army of 500,000 men. The Bureau of Topographical Engineers owned few accurate maps of the South. So that was problematic. President Lincoln was looking for military leadership, and Irvin McDowell, he believed, was the man to provide that leadership. And General Irvin McDowell became the first general to lead 30,000 American soldiers in battle. And he told General McDowell told President Lincoln that the army was not ready to march in July. And President Lincoln said to General McDowell, quote, "You are green, it is true, but they are green also. You are all green alike." So President Lincoln ordered McDowell to prepare the U.S. Army to march south by July 9th. And, McDowell was able to get the Army ready by July 21st, and they marched south to Bull Run River, Virginia, several miles north of Manassas Junction. Now, so this was, everyone could see that there was going to be a major battle, and folks from Washington decided that this was something they wanted to watch as a spectacle, as entertainment. And so as the day of the battle was coming, what became known as Bull Run, or also known as Manassas Junction, politicians from Washington and ladies came with their picnic baskets, and others traveled south to witness what they believed was going to be a great victory, a prelude to the march on Washington. General Irvin McDowell, the brigadier general, he was from Ohio. He planned a battle against the Confederate forces under General Beauregard, again at Manassas, Virginia, 26 miles southwest of Washington, so not too far away. This was the Battle of Bull Run. It started on Sunday, July 21st. The Confederate general was Thomas Jackson, or one of the generals, and he rallied the Confederates during the battle. And then there's this quote, Confederate General Barnard Lee said, quote, "There is Jackson with his Virginians standing like a stone wall." So this famous general, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, got his nickname Stonewall during the Battle of Bull Run. Now that day, July 21st, Stonewall Jackson, Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, began the day on his knees in prayer, and he held his ground. Other Confederate forces retreated. Of course, this major, he had all these young fellas, and they had never experienced a war before, so it's easy to panic. And again, this Barnard Lee said, quote, "Look, men, there is Jackson, standing like a stone wall." Famous quote. Now, as the battle was happening, President Lincoln was asked General Winfield Scott how the battle was going. They were getting news by telegram, and Scott said, "Very well." So President Lincoln went to church on Sunday, July 21st. News from the battle at Manassas was relayed from Fairfax, Virginia. Mounted couriers established by Andrew Carnegie in the U.S. Military Telegraph Corps. So, President Lincoln received a telegram from General McDowell as the battle raged regarding the Battle of Bull Run, quote, "The day is lost. Save Washington and the remnants of this army. The routed troops will not reform." So the battle turned out to be a major victory for the Confederates, a major defeat for the Union. Now, railroads played a major role in the Battle of Bull Run. 9,000 Confederate reinforcements arrived by railroad to help the Confederates win the battle. Union troops retreated back to Washington. They were in full flight, and there was panic and disorderly manner. And sometimes they overtook the surprise spectators, the people who were coming back. So this was a big shock. 10 hours of fighting. 900 men, including 500 Union soldiers, were dead, and the hope in the North and the South for a quick war was shattered. Other reports indicated 1,000 men died in the 8 hours of fighting. Now, this was more than half of the deaths of the Mexican War, so this was showing how this Civil War was going to be really the most bloody in American history. After the Battle of Bull Run, the spiral of violence was just beginning. A great victory for the South, for the Confederacy, and this stalled the Union march into Virginia until 1862, so this meant Richmond was safe. And this was a very alarming defeat for President Lincoln. His cabinet had an emergency late-night meeting. There was an unknown Southern poet who wrote a poem and went like this, quote, "Yankee Doodle near Bull Run met his adversary. First he thought the fight he'd won. Fact proved quite contrary. Panic struck, he fled with speed, of lightning glib with unction, of slippery grease in full stampede, from famed Manassas Junction." Now, despite this defeat, there was renewed patriotism in the North. Morale was high, but although people were sober, realized this was not going to be a quick, easy war. The Chicago Tribune newspaper wrote, quote, "Like the great Antæus, who, when thrown to the ground, gathered strength from the contact with Mother Earth and arose refreshed and stronger than before to renew the contest, so of the Sons of Liberty, the loss of this battle will only nerve them to greater efforts." Wonderful reference to ancient Greece and Rome. Now, during the war, Clara Barton became the most well-known Washington City-based woman to volunteer after the first Battle of Bull Run. She became known as the soldier's friend, and throughout the Civil War, Clara Barton went to battlefields, and she was a familiar figure comforting wounded men. She ran soup kitchens and provided supplies and to nurse the wounded. She kept track of men who died and wrote letters to their families. So, a very important hero of the Civil War, Clara Barton. President Lincoln enjoyed the writing of the popular humorist of the era, Robert Henry Newell. And there was one story that a Union soldier was shot in the head, and his name was Private Shorty. And this Private Shorty reportedly said, quote, "Is any of my brains hanging out?" And then as his friend said, "No, Shorty, you never had any to hang out." So some grim humor from the war, early parts of the war. Now, aside from the defeat in the battle, there was also a medical failure. The guys who had been wounded did not get good care. So there was the knowledge that there really had to be a lot done to prepare for future battles. Change was inspired. The U.S. Sanitary Commission was created to inspect hospitals, build new hospitals. This United States Sanitary Commission had ladies, and there was the Ladies' Aid Societies were formed in the North to support Union soldiers after the fall of Fort Sumter. They collected food, clothing, and medical supplies. So the war effort was beginning. Great war effort. July 22nd, John J. Crittenden in the House of Representatives from Kentucky and Andrew Johnson in the Senate from Tennessee introduced identical resolutions that the Civil War was being waged not to interfere with institutions of the states. In other words, it was not being fought to end slavery, but to preserve the Union. General Winfield Scott, the Mexican War hero, was past his prime, and the public believed he needed to retire. However, President Lincoln refused to indulge in finger-pointing. He did not want to blame General Winfield Scott for the defeat at Bull Run, but he also knew that he needed to find better military leadership. In the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 2 reads, quote, "The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the service of the United States." So in other words, the president is the top military commander. Now President Lincoln had 3 months of military service himself as a private in the Black Hawk War in 1832, so he had very little military service personally. However, the Confederate President Jefferson Davis went to West Point and served in the Mexican War, so the Confederates had an advantage there. And Jeff Davis had been the Secretary of War for President Franklin Pierce from 1853 to 1857. In August of 1861, President Lincoln proclaimed a day of prayer, quote, "to recognize the hand of God in this terrible visitation, and in sorrowful remembrance of our own faults and crimes as a nation and as individuals, to humble ourselves before Him, and to pray for His mercy, to pray that we may be spared further punishment, though most justly deserved." Wow, quite a prayer. Now when Elmer Ellsworth had been killed, this Confederate flag, which was blood stained with Ellsworth's blood, the flag was given to Mary as a remembrance of him. Now, there was a story when President Lincoln was reviewing troops on the portico of the White House, and his son Tab got a hold of that Confederate flag and was running back and forth waving it. Of course, he was just a little boy, but this was kind of a funny thing, or shocking. This shocked people. Tad Lincoln running around with that Confederate flag. Now, at that time, Virginia included West Virginia. And it was originally Virginia, like I said, included West Virginia. And over the years, Virginia, what's now Virginia, dominated West Virginia, which was, the western part was poor, the wealthy part was in the east. And when Virginia decided to secede from the Union, the folks in West Virginia, or the western part of Virginia, they decided to secede from Virginia. They supported the Union. And there was fighting in West Virginia, led by the Union General George McClellan, achieved victories in July against the Confederates. These were the first Union victories, and as a result, General McClellan became a hero, and West Virginia was on its way to becoming a new Union state. So that's very interesting. The men in West Virginia wanted to enlist in the Union Army and did so. By December of 1862, West Virginia achieved statehood. So that was one result of the Civil War. This was exactly what President Lincoln was talking about. That when the states seceded, what's to prevent parts of states from seceding from each other? or from seceding from the Confederacy. July of 1861, General George B Mcclellan, there was a telegram sent to him in West Virginia. He was summoned to Washington, and they asked him to replace General McDowell. George McClellan was only 34 years old. He had achieved these victories in West Virginia. They weren't major battles, but nevertheless they were victories, and this inspired the secession of West Virginia from Virginia, and of course the Union as well. And the Union, the United States, was ready for a hero, and General George McClellan was that hero, at least early on. He had good posture, he was very strong physically, he was handsome and looked like a hero. And so George McClellan became the new top Union general, and he said, quote, "It is an immense task that I have on my hands, but I believe I can accomplish it." General George McClellan, had spent 1 year in Europe studying the tactics used in the Crimean War. He was fluent in French, German, and Russian. He had resigned from the Army, the U.S. Army, in 1857, decided to pursue a future in business. By age 30, he was the chief engineer for the Illinois Central Railroad and making $3,000 a year, twice his Army pay. And he, like I said, he was the hero, or people thought he would be the savior. Turns out he really wasn't. Although he did have play an important, helpful role. They called him Young Napoleon. So George McClellan came to Washington and tried to get things orderly, get the troops prepared for more fighting. Sometimes he spent 12 hours in the saddle on horseback trying to reestablish order in the army in Washington. He chewed tobacco. Now his proposal was to create a huge army and win the war in one huge battle. That was his plan. Now, General McClellan, regarding him, Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, quote, "The young general seemed able to mystically project his own self-confidence onto the demoralized troops, restoring their faith in themselves and their hope for the future." So this was he did play an important role. This was to raise the morale and get the guys organized, and because their folks were very dispirited after the defeat of Bull Run. Now his plan really was not realistic, and folks didn't know the future, and his plan of one big battle to win the war really did not happen. But this is what he believed in. Now, President Lincoln, his whole adult life had been all about self-education, and he realized he needed to. So he proceeded with his self-education and focused on military history, trying to learn from the history of war, what to do in the Civil War. So now he had this lifelong habit of putting his thoughts to paper. And one of the things he learned, or as time passed, that the Union military leaders were the greatest obstacle to military policy. Eventually he realized that General McClellan was a very problematic leader. Now these generals, including McClellan, did not like President Lincoln's involvement in the war. They thought he's a civilian, leave it to us. But under the Constitution, the president does have the responsibility, and he insisted that on that constitutional authority to set military policy. So this led to conflict, but it was his responsibility to fight the war and to win the war. Now it was very tough. Raising a large army quickly was very complicated, but this is what they had to do. Mary Lincoln, the First Lady, had this to say about the White House renovation, which she had been working on, quote, "The President's house has once more assumed the appearance of comfort and comparative beauty." Well, that came from a California journalist rather than Mary. "Never before had an American general commanded an army larger than 14,000 men." So this was something that eventually there were hundreds of thousands of troops raised. General Winfield Scott needed to step aside. John Nicolay, the secretary of President Lincoln, said that Lincoln, quote, gave himself night and day to the study of the military situation. One interesting thing in the war, there were German regiments and German immigrants. They all wanted to be together, and President Lincoln accepted the tradition of political generals. In other words, men who were politicians, and they became generals as a result, which we don't do anymore. But it was a political reality of that time. President Lincoln said, quote, at this time, quote, "The enthusiastic uprising of the people in our cause is our great reliance, and we cannot safely give it any check, even though it overflows and runs in channels not laid down in any chart." So he had these political generals fostering support of ethnic groups. He had German, Irish, Polish ethnic regiments. Karl Schurz, who was a German immigrant, raised 4 German regiments. President Lincoln recommended Schurz to become a brigadier general. And there was Franz Sigel was another German political general, and the slogan among his troops was, "I fight mit Sigel," which means I fight with Sigel. President Lincoln had been elected by half of the electorate. He needed support from the opposition Democratic Party. So he ended up having Democratic political generals such as Benjamin Butler, John A. Logan, John A. McClellan, and Daniel Sickles. President Lincoln was riding a teeter-totter in this war, very complicated. He had professional and political soldiers, needed both. He believed that the war progress would only come as men proved themselves on the battlefield. Well, that concludes today's presentation. We'll continue next time with part 11 of the life of Abraham Lincoln. Hope you find a good history book to read. There are so many wonderful history books out there. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. So far, we have made 725 history videos in 7 areas: world history, American history, book reviews, poetic tours, Cleveland baseball, family history, and autobiography. There's a donate feature. You might consider making a donation to help support this work. If you live in Metro Manila, Philippines, and are looking for a high school, you might consider Restless Educational Center. Restless is located on Allenby Street in San Juan, Metro Manila, Philippines, not far from the corner of P. Guevara and Wilson Street. At Restless, we specialize in helping young people who have had difficulty in the larger traditional high schools. We are more than a school. We are a warm, supportive community, and we strive to be creative and innovative so the students enjoy going to school and enjoy learning. And the website is restless.education, RESALEST. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.